Good morning, everyone. My name is Ed Basso. I'm the Superintendent and President of Educational Programs here at Perkins School for the Blind. Thank you so much for taking time to join us this morning. It is truly my pleasure to welcome you this morning for a discussion about one of our most important and impactful programs here at Perkins School for the Blind, the Early Intervention Infant Toddler Program. This is a big anniversary year for the program. Can anyone guess how long we've been in existence? Oh, wait a minute. I promised Terry I was not going to steal her thunder. She's going to share that tidbit of it, but think in your mind and see if you can get this right. Our early intervention infant toddler program is life-changing for families, and I really can personally attest to this because almost 5 years ago today, and it's hard to believe it's been 5 years, 5 years ago today, my daughter, Ella, was in the infant toddler program. We came to Perkins and she joined the infant toddler program. We started with home visits with actually Brenda Allaire, who's going to be on the call a little bit later, and then ended up in the infant toddler play group. And it was probably one of the most life-changing experiences we could have had. And you can imagine, as a special educator for more than 35 years when I came to Perkins, having a daughter who had vision loss was a completely different experience for me. I had been a professional for all the years in the field, and then all of a sudden I was a parent. And I can tell you, when the diagnosis first came, I felt very alone. And I can tell you today, I can say I'm never alone again because I get to be a part of the Perkins community, not only as a professional, but as a parent forever, because Perkins never lets go you once you're in. And so we're so very fortunate. Ella today is very successful because of the foundation laid at Perkins School for the Blind. And so I'm so grateful for that and continue to look to the future as we continue to evolve and become the best standard of care for students in early intervention across the whole entire country. And so it is my pleasure now to introduce Terry Turgeon, who is the Education Director for Community Programs and leads the Infant Toddler Program. Terry, I turn it over to you now.
Ed, thank you for that introduction. And Brenda and I certainly can identify with your story, so thank you for sharing that as parents ourselves. I'm excited to be a part of this webinar and to share more information with our audience about our infant toddler program. Let me tell you a little bit about our program that I think you'll find of interest. We are, Perkins, have and always have been the sole provider of vision services to children in Massachusetts ages birth to 3. Certainly, we pride ourselves on touching families first. And this year, as Ed alluded to, we are celebrating 40 years of our program being in existence. The black and white photo on the screen shows what our program looked like. This photo was taken in 1982. The program started 2 years earlier in 1980, when we worked with only 10 Boston-based families. Today, we serve well over 500 children and families each year. And although I don't have access necessarily to those early day records, we believe that we've served well over 10,000 children in the past 40 years. With philanthropic support, even back in the early 1980s, leaders at Perkins School for the Blind traveled to other states, sharing information and resources, and even seed money as to how those other states could also start their own early intervention programs and infant toddler services. And it's truly remarkable to think about Perkins' reach and its impact, not just across the Commonwealth, but nationally as well. The color photo on the screen shows what our infant toddler group looks like today. We service children all across the Commonwealth, including children and families who've been historically underrepresented and haven't had always the same access to both educational and medical services. We work to ensure that all children and all families, regardless of their circumstances, have the same exceptional experience. The infant toddler program today is based on a family-centered practice and is served by 15 itinerant teachers of the visually impaired, which use a home-based visiting approach. The program today has also 3 on-campus parent-child groups. Groups are really incredibly special, as Ed suggested. They're special because it's that place where parents often, for the very first time, meet other families like their own, where they have an opportunity to meet with a social worker and they can talk about, share, and discuss the joys and challenges of raising a child with impairment. It's here at group and with their home visiting teacher that parents learn how their child's visual impairment impacts their overall development. They learn how to have high expectations for their child and what types of strategies and supports their children may need in order to be successful later, particularly as they begin that important transition to preschool. Parents often teaching other parents along their own journeys. Our work here at Perkins, particularly in the infant toddler program, is rooted in that belief that every child can learn, regardless of their visual impairment and or additional disabilities, and that no one has a more long-term vested interest in the outcome of that child than their family, and naturally, families make for the very best leaders. Recently, while I was on the phone with a mom who was referring her daughter to our program, she began to cry, and she said, "I never thought we'd find ourselves. I never thought that this would happen to us." You know, this is a universal truth, I think, amongst parents. Suddenly, we find ourselves members of a club we never would have elected to join. But what makes Perkins truly exceptional is that we bring families together who have had this collective shared experience, who are new to this journey, and we demonstrate to them, like Ed said, you're never alone again. And that regardless of their child's age or their stage or what their needs will be, we will always be there for them. We build this from our earliest time with them in the infant toddler program, and it's a relationship that lasts a lifetime. And we lead with a guiding belief, with the right supports and services, their child, every child, can reach their own full potential. And so let's go ahead and meet one of our families, the Wetzel family. Mom and Dad, Jesse and John, and their two children, little sister Aurora and Addison. Addie, as she's known, attended our infant toddler program along with her parents.
Meet Addie, a fun-loving little girl with Leber's congenital amaurosis, a rare type of inherited eye disorder that causes vision loss at birth.
Addie sits in her mom's lap and infant toddler circle time.
Like many young children with visual impairment, Addie started her educational journey in Perkins' renowned infant toddler program.
Addie's family portrait and Addie in the classroom and at home.
When she first arrived, she struggled with sensory issues that caused a lot of stress for her and her family. Even simple things like putting on socks felt like difficult activities. Perkins educators knew exactly where to start. Jessie is Addie's mom.
That was something we started working on, frankly, almost right away.
Addie feels a braille book and uses a sensory table.
We started working on having her touch different textures in books or fill Ziploc bags with like whipped cream and Jell-O.
Addie working in class and playing on the playground.
Beth was Addie's first teacher at Perkins.
Some of the unique ways that Addie benefited from early intervention are all kind of the resources that we bring into the home. So I brought things in like light boxes and adaptive equipment that we bring that would help her with her reaching and her grasping and exploring textures.
Addie, dressed in PPE, works in class and plays on the playground.
Now Addie has started preschool, and those earliest lessons learned at Perkins are already helping her in big ways. Jessie, Addie's mom.
So she's now working on letter recognition with her hands, and we work on finger strength games, and we do different songs that work on finger isolation to help isolate her fingers, which she'll also need for Braille.
Numbers. 1.
Let's listen to the numbers, and then we'll do letters, okay? Okay. Swipe left.
2.
Andrea is Addie's current teacher.
Addie developed so many skills from being in the early intervention program. She was able to develop the preschool readiness skills, such as tactual readiness for Braille, by being able to explore objects, identify things by texture, by shape. She learns basic concepts such as over and under. She learns listening skills to follow directions at school.
Staff, volunteers, and children in the infant toddler program, and Addie at home.
And on top of everything Addie has learned, the infant toddler program has given her family a community, a safe place to be vulnerable, to learn, and grow. Jessie, Addie's mom.
It's a place that you can go and you can feel comfortable that you're not going to be judged, that your questions are heard and listened to and they're answered. And it's a warm and welcoming environment, and people want you there and they want to help you and they want to teach you and your student, because it's a family approach. It's not just the student, it's everybody. everybody has to learn. Everybody has things that they need to work on and questions that they need to answer. And Perkins provides that.
For 40 years, our infant toddler program has been the first point of contact for families of blind and visually impaired children. Because Addie and kids just like her deserve the support they need to get off to the right start in life. Perkins logo, perkins.org.
Thank you to the Wetzel family for sharing your story with us. Clearly, looking at Addie, she definitely is going to reach her full potential. We are so excited to see what the future holds for her. Clearly, Addie benefited from the infant toddler group and her home visiting teacher, Beth, who recognized early on that she would need Braille to access learning later in preschool. So Beth and her family spent significant time teaching those early tactile readiness skills, strengthening both her hands and her fingers so that she would be successful later in preschool. Addison exemplifies what we want for all of our children: access to early education in a supportive environment like the infant toddler program, educating her parents to ensure that there's a successful transition to preschool. And her parents know that no matter where they go along their journey, Perkins will always be here for them. Of course, this is what our program looked like prior to March 2020, when the pandemic. So much of our program's core essential elements remain the same today as they did 40 years ago, but our delivery looks a bit different. At this point in the program, I'd like to turn it over to Brenda Allaire. Brenda is our infant toddler coordinator, former parent, and a teacher within our program. She's going to share how, with philanthropic support, we worked quickly to both pivot and scale our program to a telehealth model, making sure that no family went without services during the pandemic. Brenda.
Terry, thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic in March of 2020, we have adapted our infant toddler program to support families and children using remote services. We were able to do that in part, large part, because of philanthropic support that allowed us to initiate a pilot project for telepractice in the summer of 2019, something we had been hoping to do for quite some time, and of course, long before the pandemic was even a thought. Our experiences with that pilot, though, led directly to our ability to spend the first 2 weeks of the statewide shutdown in March of 2020, doing intensive professional development for the 15 teachers and 2 social workers in our program. That training was led by 5 teachers who had been involved in the pilot and who were well-versed with virtual teaching. At the time, of course, we, like many others, believed the closures would be short-lived. But over the course of the past year, we continued to meet as a team to revise and refine our virtual teaching practices. As the graph here shows, during our pilot program, during which we worked with 10 families, we conducted a little less than 50 virtual visits. By pivoting so quickly to virtual teaching at the start of the pandemic, our teachers were able to do over 1,000 visits before the end of last summer. And to date, they've done nearly 5,000 virtual visits. Our teachers continue to show tremendous dedication and commitment to the children and families in our program. Of course, for babies and toddlers, our virtual visits focus on a coaching model, really supporting and guiding families so that they can use specific strategies to help their child better use their vision or other senses. The pictures you see here are still frames from one of our TVIs, Stephanie, during a telepractice session with one of her families, Schroeder and his mom. Stephanie is using a familiar book, which has been modified for Schroeder's needs, to encourage him to use his switch for requesting turn the page. Prior to the session, Stephanie coached Schroeder's mom in how to set up the switch and which of his toys to have available for tactile exploration, which led to a very successful visit, as you can see in his big smile. One of the core components of the infant toddler program is supporting families as their children transition to preschool at the age of 3, something we saw earlier in Addie's video. Even in the best of times, this transition can be challenging for families, and the pandemic, of course, added many new layers of difficulty. Our commitment to ensuring that all children in Massachusetts have access to appropriate vision services led us to continue providing virtual visits to 195 children across the Commonwealth who had already turned 3, children who would typically have aged out of infant toddler on their 3rd birthday. But because preschool programs were closed and these children would otherwise have had no access to vision services, we continued meeting regularly with their families and their early intervention teams throughout the spring and summer. And those visits really helped to coordinate a smooth transition for those children once preschools resumed some services in the fall. As Terry mentioned, in pre-COVID times, our program included 3 on-campus groups. While we can never fully replicate the in-person experiences that happen here in our classroom, we do recognize the critical role that these groups play for families, and we remain committed to providing them in a virtual format. Each week, you'll find these groups meeting together on Zoom, parents and children singing and playing homemade musical instruments during musical therapy, and then in that same shared space, parents connecting with each other, sharing the challenges and joys in raising their child with a visual impairment. Teachers across our program have also found new ways to support families in this virtual world, often by collaborating with each other. Beth, who you saw earlier in Addie's video, is both a TVI and a deaf-blind specialist in our program, and she's been able to virtually join visits with her colleagues to share information on communication ideas for other families. One of our teachers in Western Massachusetts was able to provide a virtual parent support group to those families in the rural part of the state who traditionally have not been able to access our on-campus programming. As Terry mentioned earlier, parents really are their child's first and best teachers. Through our virtual sessions, we've been able to help parents use the toys and materials they have at home, often in combination with adaptive materials created right here at Perkins, to create new and fun opportunities for play. In this next video clip, you'll see one of my students, Lincoln, and his mom, Amanda. In the first part of the video, Lincoln has his favorite toy car, which you'll see set against a black tabletop and a black background. This allows him better visual access to his toys, and we are all working together to support him in making his car go. Some children, like Lincoln, need a lot of extra time to visually process information. But in the interest of time, this video was edited just slightly to show his actions. You'll also see an example of a coaching conversation as Amanda and I talk about one of Lincoln's favorite books.
All right, what's in front of you? There it is.
All right, Lincoln, we're gonna play Go, Go Car. Can you push the car? We're gonna give you a little bit of time, right? We need a minute to process. Yay, Lincoln, good job. Push a little more.
Push it some more. Can you push it over here?
Can you push the car to mommy? Yay, Lincoln, good job.
Either just lay it down or here.
So if he's gonna be reaching for it, yep, I would have him just like that. Perfect. One of the things we could do for the book too, to make it a little simpler to look at, is on the top of the pages with the words, you could kind of put a little strip of glue and put some black felt so that you can lift it to read the words, but if you want him to look at it, the felt would cover the words and make it a lot less busy for him.
Isn't he such a cutie? Lincoln has since turned 3 in the fall, and he has moved on to a preschool program where he's continuing to learn and grow along with his family. Today is really nearly 1 year to the day when we first began considering how we could possibly scale up this small pilot project to serve every child in our program. As Terry said, a little more than 500 children in a year. but we know that the collective efforts of our teachers, social workers, and administrators can really achieve great things. Like ripples in a pond, each of us brought our creative energy and, most importantly, our dedication to children and families to ensure that regardless of the format, Perkins Infant Toddler program remains as strong and relevant today as it was last year, and that we continue to build on the success of that first small group in 1980 as we move forward into the future. Thank you so much for listening and hearing about our program, and I'd like to turn things back over to Ed Basso.
Thank you, Brenda and Terry, for sharing so much about the important work that occurs in the infant toddler program. It's amazing. It still astounds me. And having lived through it myself, I'm always amazed, but then I continue to hear these incredible stories about the work that you do, and I'm so impressed by it. Now it's time for the opportunity to have question and answer. So there is a Q&A box that you can go ahead and type in a question for us if you have a question. And then Terry and Brenda and I are available to answer your questions. So please feel free to throw some questions in the box and we'll be taking a look at those. But as we get started, I'd like to ask a couple questions of my own really quickly to Brenda and Terry. So Brenda, first for you, once you transitioned into the virtual sessions, what surprised you? Were there any like silver linings in the COVID time, or what were some of those kind of things that were unexpected that may have happened as you switched to full telehealth?
Such a great question. And again, we were really lucky that we had access to this pilot project that gave us some insight into sort of what to expect, but certainly scaling up to the whole program was a pretty intensive effort. There were some really good silver linings that we found over time. And one of those really was maintaining a connection to families during what was, as we all remember, a pretty intensive period. Last spring and summer, I think we were all just learning how this was going to go. Families were really worried about maintaining services, and teachers were really worried about making sure they could stay connected to those families we built relationships with. And this model really allowed us to keep doing that. We found that collaborating with our partners in the early intervention programs across the state has been, in a lot of ways, much easier. Our teachers aren't driving across the state to see their students. And so they can join in different meetings and spend some time with those providers as well. And really, I think one of the wonderful things that's happened is families from across the state are able to join together in those virtual meetings and really get support from one another and learn together.
Thanks, Brenda. Appreciate that. We have a question that just came into the box from Jen Volpe, and it says that we mentioned staying with these youngsters throughout the summer, fall, prior to them going to pre-K. How did that all work, and how did you manage that? And then did philanthropy help and make that happen, or how was that helpful to you? I don't know, Terry, maybe you want to take that one?
Absolutely. And, without philanthropic support, we wouldn't be able to do the great work that we do. It was initially with philanthropic support while we were waiting for the state of Massachusetts to decide what was going to happen to these 3-year-olds when preschool programs weren't open. And so it was with philanthropic support that teachers were able to continue to see children. It was really incredibly important. And philanthropic support, like I said, we wouldn't be able to do this. It was the initial seed money that allowed us to actually explore this notion of remote teaching back in July of 2019. It helped those 195 children and families stay connected to us so that they didn't fall through the crack at that incredibly important time of transition. Donor support has allowed us to hire additional teachers, to support our use of a music therapist, use of the toy library, Ed, as well as our assistive device center. And lastly, and probably not well known to others, philanthropic support allows us to have language interpreters who can accompany us either virtually or physically when we're back in person on a home visit for families for whom English isn't a primary language, so that families really understand the intervention strategies and what we intend for outcomes for their child.
Thanks, Terry. Lori Hudson just threw in a question that kind of piggybacks on what we were asking Brenda about what we learned, but what are some of the challenges that maybe teachers faced, or what were their learnings in the virtual home visits? Can you share anything about some of the challenges that teachers faced?
Sure, I can share some as a teacher and, as the coordinator of the program, hearing from teachers back in the spring and summer of last year. Initially, of course, like everybody else, we had some tech challenges, getting everybody kind of up to speed on using our platforms and helping parents really learn how to use a virtual world to support their kiddos in their homes. I think we all missed seeing children and families in person. And we've since learned, I think, some tips and tricks that have really helped us along the way. Those tech challenges have really since fallen by the wayside. I think, aside from the normal things we all do is, are you still on mute? But we've learned a lot over time, and I think have really become very successful in these visits. And while we're all, of course, looking forward to going back to some in-person visits when things are safe, the ability to really do this and keep connected with families, and sometimes families who might otherwise have missed out on services because their children have lots of medical complexities. And so even pre-COVID, we worried about exposing some of those children to different viruses or illnesses, or just have a lot going on. And so having people come into their home could be challenging. So, those lessons learned from those difficult early days, I think will carry us really well into the future as we think about what we want to take forward with us.
That's great. Anything to add, Terry?
Yeah, so Dr. Hudson, thanks for joining the call. And I know you know this from your former work. So much of what we do is built around building rapport with families and having a relationship with those parents. And so this is a different model. It's really a parent coaching model. It's not what you may remember, going in with your toy bag and actually sitting on the floor. It's teaching families, not only learning what their priorities are across the day, but then teaching them what the intervention strategies are. We know that if we can teach parents how to do the work, even when we're not there for that one little hour, the outcomes for that child are more likely.
Thanks, Terry. In thinking about going into the home, Terry, so it's home-centered. You talked about this is a very home-centered program, but tell me a little bit about how that works as you reference those 195 kids that were needing to transition. If you're working in the homes, what is it that we do to help families and the child prepare to transition to preschools?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So our work in the infant toddler program as an extension of our work within early intervention focuses first on families and not necessarily just solely on the child. One of our program's goals is to help prepare families with the information, the education they need themselves around special education, what their parent rights are, what does a timeline look like, what does eligibility look like, as well as prepare their children with the preschool skills that they need in order to be successful later. The family-centered approach is really built around those three important. It focuses on strengths and not deficits. It promotes family choice around what their priorities are. And it's really built around this sort of collaborative relationship between us as professionals and them as parents. And lastly, obviously, the work is done in the child's natural environment, which we know from our research, whether children have disabilities or not disabilities. That natural environment is their home environment along with their caregivers.
Thanks, Terry. We have another congrats and kudos comment in there, but it also asks the question, have you looked into the ability to bill for VI services using the telehealth model yet? Myra had looked into this herself a couple of years ago and was curious if there's been any luck in any of the states doing that kind of a model. I don't know, Terry, Brenda, I don't know who's best prepared to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm go ahead and answer that. We started this pilot at the urging of the Department of Public Health here in Massachusetts, who asked us to look at this model. The Clark School for the Deaf had actually already started a pilot several years ago. And so Massachusetts, I think, is building a case that this is a reimbursable model, but also an effective one. In those very early days in March, we quickly reached out to our partners at the Department of Public Health, asking them if we could, employ this and scale what was a pilot. And they were really grateful to us because there are 3 specialty providers in Massachusetts to early intervention. There's vision, and Perkins is the sole provider. There's deaf and hard of hearing, of which there are 18 providers, and there's autism, which are several. And they were incredibly happy that we sort of took a leap, and we were the first to approach them to ask, could we do this? And would they reimburse us on the model? And they have. So it's been very successful that way as well.
Awesome, thank you. So as we think about moving forward, how will last year's activities and learnings impact what the infant toddler program looks like going forward? Brenda or Terry, just how do you think, from all that we've learned and the way we pivoted, what does it look like in the future?
Absolutely. And Brenda, you're welcome to add to this.
Sure.
We certainly will take time to evaluate what's worked for us. We don't want to come out of this experience and not take those silver linings forward with us into whatever our new normal is. We hope as we move forward, go back to some type of in-person, that this actually just becomes part of our model at the Perkins Infant Toddler Program, that we offer a hybrid approach. We can see that it works as well as it's effective. And so a hybrid approach that combines both part in-person as well as virtual. Brenda, do you want to add to that?
Definitely, I agree. Terry, taking all of those silver linings, the rich things that we've learned over the course of this entire year. And one of the things that we've learned that I know that we'll take forward with us is that for some families, this virtual model has made them better able to engage. For families that need a flexible schedule, for example, or again, families, as I mentioned before, who have lots of appointments. And we really want to make sure that we are providing the best possible services to all families in Massachusetts, regardless of where they live. And so I think that's going to be something that's important for us going forward, and really supporting those families. Having the families join us together in those Zoom meetings has been wonderful. And really, parents have expressed over and over again how happy they are, especially during this past year where some people have felt very isolated, to meet other parents like them and to join in those sessions, and have found it a very positive experience. So I know we'll be able to take that forward with us.
Awesome. So one last call. Are there any more questions? I think we've answered everything that's come into the chat and into the Q&A box. There is a nice comment here from Deepa, who says, thank you for the incredible work that you all do at Perkins. We are so grateful for your service. Please let me know how I can participate or be of service in this work. So we'll certainly share ways that you could help us, but I just wanted to make sure that we had any opportunity for any last questions before we move to close the session. Terry and Brenda, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your incredible experience and knowledge and your passion for the program. Really, it's what astounded Amy and I when we brought Ella, was the passion of everybody in this program to ensure that every kid gets what they need and every family gets what they need. And just incredible work that happens. And so I thank both of you for, and the teachers, for the work you do every day to change the lives of families. You certainly changed theirs. And I want to thank everybody that joined us today. Thank you for being here with us this morning, for being a part of the Perkins mission. We always invite you to stay engaged with us and to be part of our programs and to support our programs. We need all the support from each of you. You will receive a copy of this recording. It'll come to you in the next few days. And what we'd ask for you is to please share this link with your networks to help raise awareness about our program. And somehow maybe it'll make its way to a family in need, the way it made it to me. And I was able to find out about Perkins program, and that really brought me here. So we thank you so much for joining us this morning, and thank you for all of your support. And I don't know if Terry, Brenda have any final comments here, but we're just grateful to be a part of the program and to do the work we do and to have your support.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe and be well. Thank you.